Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Face to Face. My name is Godfred Akoto Boafo. My guest today is an esteemed Ghanaian of many talents: politician, playwright, journalist, author, educationist. What else can I say? The Honorable Kojo Yankah is our guest on Face to Face. Honorable Kojo Yankah, welcome to Face to Face.
Welcome as well.
The first time I heard of you, I was a kid in secondary school, and a book was placed in front of me, and my literature teacher, Miss Otu, said, every Ghanaian kid has to read this book. When did you discover books?
Which book are you talking about?
I am talking about a book called Crossroads at Ankobia.
Oh, that's actually my first book.
Yes.
And I think it came out in 1982 or 83, around that time. And it took me 7 years to get that book out.
7
years, because the producer and the publisher was a white guy. Said, your first book, take your time and do it well. If your first book doesn't sell, forget about writing. That's what he told me. So he was editing, and at some point I got distressed that why is this guy not just going ahead to publish my book? And he kept editing, change that, and eventually it came out in 1982. That was Crossroads at Ankobia, I remember.
And after that, the next time I heard of the Honorable Kojo Yankah, he had been at the forefront of PANAFEST, not as the founder, but a lot of people link you with PANAFEST. How did you get involved with that?
Well, this also because I was invited to serve on the PANAFEST initially as the chairman of the publicity committee when it started in 1992. And in 1994, I was given the opportunity to chair. So I became chairman of PANAFEST. From that time until 2-3 years ago, when I thought somebody else should take the chairmanship of PANAFEST. So, and you probably know that PANAFEST was an idea that was created by the mother of A.C. Sutherland, Dr. Ifwa Sutherland. Ifwa Sutherland was a playwright. She was one of the most distinguished women writers of her time, in the class of Ama Tedu, Chinua Achebe, and many others that you can think of. And what most people did not know, she was married to an African American. And she wrote a paper in the late 80s that maybe it would be a good idea to bring together Africans from the diaspora and on the continent together through the vehicles of arts and culture to celebrate Africa's civilization. And again, you know, I believe, looking back, that it all came out of my experience, marrying an African American man and looking at all the challenges and also the opportunities that came in their life. You know, if you go back to Amatedu's The Dilemma of a Ghost. Do you go here, do you go there? I'm sure those experiences were very vital in her writing of a paper to government that why don't we Ghana also the light in African liberation. Let Ghana host a festival of artists, cultural activists, performers, intellectuals on the theme rebirth of African civilization. In other words, she thought that if we could bring all African artists together, and she didn't talk politicians. It said, let them understand each other. Let them write about each other. Let them know each other. So she brought up the idea, and the first one was celebrated on a low-key basis at the Cape Coast Castle. And she wrote this to government because she thought that Ghana had the Ministry of Culture and Tourism at the time, and they should take it up. So it came straight to the ministerial level, but at the Commission on Culture, which was under the ministry, they created that secretariat, and the first person was Kunu Dake to become the executive secretary of PANAFEST. So 94, then it blossomed in the sense that we had the opportunity now, with the help of government and Ghana Airways at the time, to travel. We launched it in the UK, we launched it in New York, we launched it in the Caribbean, we went to launch it in South Africa, and that was the time we were also able to bring in Stevie Wonder, and brought in thousands of performers from various parts of the world, the black world. So the Caribbean responded, big Jamaican delegation. Nigeria responded. Guinea brought their national dance company, got groups from South Africa, and that's how it started growing. And 97, we didn't do it in 96 as should have been the tradition, because there was an election. So it was moved to 97. 97, I happened to be also at the same time Central Regional Minister, so it was like in my own territory. So I used the opportunity again to go around the world to launch PANAFEST in various parts of the world, and again resounding success. In 1999, I had been transferred to Ashanti as Ashanti Regional Minister, but I still carried the PANAFEST hat. So we added on new programs like the trail, the slave route, or the English call it slave route, Americans say route. So we had a week before PANAFEST. The participants traveled from the north all the way down, used the route all the way through Asana Manson, and then to Cape Coast or Elmina Castles before the main PANAFEST events. The events normally took about 3 days, and they covered, youth meetings, women topics, intellectual colloquium, performances, bazaar for people to trade goods here and there. And then on top of that, we had the big musical concerts. That took place. But in 97, 99, we added on a concert in Accra, and then even in Kumasi, we had, as part of PANAFEST, a meeting of African traditional leaders. It was hosted by Otumfuo then. So we got quite a number of traditional leaders coming from Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, South Africa. They joined the Ghana chiefs, traditional leaders. Beautiful conference. Now, before 99, something happened. And I know that most people at the Ministry of Tourism do not even know this history. President Rawlings visited Jamaica. He was invited on an official visit, and he went with the Deputy Minister of Tourism at the time, Mr. Urekwa. And on his way back from Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago also invited him, so he also went there. But they invited him as guest of honor for the celebration of Emancipation Day. So as soon as he came back, he sent the Deputy Minister, Urekwa, to come to Cape Coast to see me for us to plan to add Emancipation Day to PANAFEST. It wasn't a PANAFEST year, but it was organized by the PANAFEST Secretariat. Now, why Emancipation Day? Emancipation Day because the people of Trinidad, led by the Caribbean Historical Society, had decided that Emancipation Day was also very important to celebrate in the black world, because they in the Caribbean had a festival called the Discovery Day. It's like the colonial thing. Christopher Columbus or whoever who discovered, so-called, they had a day called Discovery Day. So they fought for it to be changed to Emancipation Day, the day that blacks were emancipated. So we discussed this in Cape Coast. We set in motion a program, and significantly that year, descendants of slaves, two descendants of slaves, one from Jamaica, one from New York, were brought down. They were exhumed and brought into this country. When we talk about return, year of return, it started from that time, in my opinion. Because specifically, we didn't just see people coming as tourists, but we took bodies out of New York, and New York from the Black Museum, Black Cemetery in New York, and then of course another family who were also descendants of slaves, also exhumed one body and brought it to Ghana. It was a very significant thing that happened, and we organized so well. It happened to be also the time I was in Cape Coast. So the beauty about it is that there was a lot of publicity, so they were welcomed here in Accra, and then with escorts, motor escorts and all that, we took them to Coromantee. They didn't go to Cape Coast. They stopped in Coromantee. Why? Because the Coromantee, if you go to Jamaica, there's this place called Coromantine. And so they believe that when they were living in West Africa, they all came from Coromantee. And the Coromantee people were brave people, very dynamic fighters. So that spirit in the Jamaican people was not by chance. It had an ancestral base. So we stopped over in Coromantee to get the chiefs to pour libation, and it was so well organized. We got about 100 fishermen to get on the seas. We got about 25, 30 boats, canoes, that were going to ride on the sea to Elmina, Cape Coast Castle. So these caskets that we brought from Accra, we put them on the seas, and you have no idea. People rode, I went by car because I had to go early to Cape Coast to receive, and there was a huge crowd, thousands waiting in Cape Coast for these bodies to arrive. And that was the first time we opened the door of no return and made it door of return. So that door at the Cape Coast Castle, which had been known as door of return, was changed. So the door of return came. We allowed the bodies into Cape Coast Castle. A lot of ceremonies, events, poetry, recital, prayers, libations. A whole lot of rituals were performed to welcome them home. But that was not the place they were reburied. That time we had also discovered through PANAFEST that Asinimanso was the last place, was a river there, where slaves had their last bath when they were being transported from the North Ashanti and those places to Cape Coast. They had their last bath, and after that, they didn't have their bath again, because in Cape Coast Castle, they never had their bath. And then they were taken out. So we decided to have a remembrance point by the river. So we took the bodies the following day to Asinimanso. That's how Asinimanso became a tourist attraction. Otherwise, nobody knew about Asinimanso. So we created that and reburied them there. The chiefs and people in the whole area were so involved that it stayed on, and today has been part of our celebrations. So that was the beginning of Emancipation Day. And then it was still organized by the PANAFEST Secretariat.
You paint a very strong picture of spiritual connection, tourism, all through
Yeah.
PANAFEST. Does that still exist?
That is what should have been. See, the attempt was being made to get that spiritual connection back. And if you really met at the peak of PANAFEST, if you really met people, whether they were intellectuals or performers or painters, you saw similarities. And there were people who wept several times, anytime, particularly those from the diaspora. They came and met people in charge of their own affairs and then seen how beautiful the culture is, because wherever they have been told lies about Africa, about the continent, as if no human beings even live here. So they come back here not just to see the castles and forts, no. They feel the connection, the spiritual connection between diasporans and people on the continent. And for me, that is one aspect that should be highlighted in all PANAFEST events. Because one of the events with PANAFEST is there's an atonement ceremony at the Elmina Castle. That's the first major program of PANAFEST, where you have all the chiefs and elders welcoming all those who have arrived on that day, and then they pour a libation to welcome them, and then they also, in their prayers, atone for any role that any Africans would have played in the whole slavery. But then they welcome them back, after which there is an open meal. Oto food is made for everybody there to start PANAFEST. So these spiritual links are all there, but there's a reason why PANAFEST is not, or did not carry on the way it should have.
Yes, and that was going to be my next question, because
I knew you were going to it.
Yes, you paint a picture of such enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And national attention, because I remember there was a time when you brought Mutabaruka, you brought all these Yellow King Yellow,
that's right,
Shabarangs.
That's right.
It hasn't happened in a very long time.
Yeah, true. The reason is all funding. If government gets its act together, you can go back to those days. What happens is that government gave a lot of support. Now, these American artists, particularly the big ones, you needed to entice them to come to Africa. I remember our first meeting with Stevie Wonder in New York, Harlem, and he was like, well, he'll be prepared to go to Africa, but are you people prepared to pay for my, going to? Under normal circumstances, you would think, oh, rich, performers like this would not need money. But of course, I mean, he was the star. So even his band men and other things alone cost us $20,000 at that time to bring him. So, and the idea was that if you had a very popular artist, it could be a musician, he could be a dancer, he could be a writer. It was also like the magnets that people want to, oh, he's going to Africa, we'll follow him and go. It makes it. That makes a lot of sense. So government was supporting PANAFEST to pay for all these people. Most of the big names that you hear, they had their tickets paid for, they had their hotels taken care of, and if you didn't get governments, even corporate Ghana, some of them sponsored, but not as big as government. So when in 1999, government decided to withdraw the subsidy, the support for PANAFEST, that was when PANAFEST started suffering. And so the Secretariat put themselves together to establish the PANAFEST Foundation, just to keep it going. So it's been going, but not on the same scale that I'm talking to you about. And that's why we have not had PANAFEST the way that it would have been.
Then you surely must be excited by this whole concept of the year of return as laid down, because this is state-backed. they seem to be interested at least in a way.
Yeah, year of return. It's a grand idea, but I know why year of return. I have attended festivals in Jamestown, Virginia, celebrating a certain number of years when the first African landed. And this year is the 400th year. So most African Americans, those in the diaspora, definitely see this as an opportunity to come back to the continent. So year of return, yes. And so Ghana government is partnering a private organization, the Adinkra Group in America, to bring as many African Americans as possible. So yes, it's a good thing to say year of return. But for me, what is important is when they come, what are they coming to do? See, if you don't, because it's a whole year's program from January to December. My interest is in the content of what you give them. Do they just come and walk around? What program do you have on the ground? So yes, it's a very good idea, and I know that a lot more people, since the president launched it in Washington, are looking forward to coming to Ghana to see. So what I have suggested to the committee, and which I think is going on, is that they are linking very much to PANAFEST programs, because that one is a solid one that happens around the end of July to the beginning of August, so that those who are planning will have something specific to get onto. And you know, most tourists will come during that time. So they have to deepen the content of the program that we'll have in Ghana. There's an international hip hop festival that is also going to happen in Accra as part of PANAFEST, and that will also service the year of return. There should be conferences all over Ghana, in Ashanti, in Sabalugo market. You know, we should have events. I believe they have done it, but if they haven't, this is what should happen. The content is more important than just the excitement of them coming. So if we have programs well laid out, and I know PANAFEST is preparing itself to participate in this, then we will have the benefits that should come. But it shouldn't end there. A year of return doesn't mean it's over. It's already started. So we should continue to have attractive programs to receive diasporans every year.
All right, then. You are watching Face to Face with the Honorable Kojo Yankah. He says he prefers the title, the Honorable Kojo Yankah. We'll be right back.
Every weekday at 8 p.m., City Newsroom brings you analysis of the major news stories of the day. In-depth, comprehensive, and researched. It's 1 hour of local and international news from 8 to 9 p.m. It's the City Newsroom. Weekdays on City TV.
Welcome back to Face with the Honorable Kojo Yankah. Now, Honorable, before we went on our break, we were talking about the year of return and its impact. And recently, City FM, in our Heritage Month, which is the month of March, has went around the country. And we came to one realization: a lot of our heritage sites are in very, very poor shape. Nobody seems to be taking care of these heritage sites. And if we are talking about Emancipation Day, we are talking about the year of return, people are returning to some of these forts which hold symbolic value. Most of them are in very horrible shape. What seems to be the problem? Nobody is interested in maintaining the history.
See, first of all, we have a Ghana Museums and Monuments Board which is underfunded. And for me, it shows that we do not want to put money into preserving what one would call our heritage. So we haven't done well as a nation in supporting the Museums and Monuments Board. Museums and Monuments Board has very good connection with UNESCO and other international bodies, which I'm sure if they had in the right programs, they could attract funding. Again, all these forts, whether they were built by the Swedes, the Danes, the Dutch, the English, those countries that originally built them, I'm sure will be interested in supporting to keep even their own heritage in Ghana. I went to Brazil. There is a beautiful cultural center. Do you know the country which sponsored it? Benin.
In Brazil?
A poor country, you would say. But they built it. Why? It is preserving the old culture of the West African kings and the religions that we had in West. If you go there, you wonder why we don't even have one like that on the west coast of Africa. But they have gone to preserve it. So why wouldn't we ask the Dutch government, all the Dutch forts? We have Fort Amsterdam. We have a lot of them. Originally, there were more than 50. But as we're speaking, only about 10 probably are in good shape. I happen to be, incidentally, also chairman of the Ghana Heritage Conservation Trust, GCT, and we oversee Kakum Park and some aspects of the Elmina and Cape Coast castles. We do our best supporting museums and monuments board in those areas, but I think a lot more could be done. Fort Santiago is in Elmina, another huge one. But you go and take your cameras around, you'll be disappointed because at least the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board could have kept them clean. That, as I'm telling you, if you interview them, they would say they are underfunded. And so we have left a lot of them to ruin. There was a group of Dutch people who wanted to restore one at Abanze, and this is long ago. I don't know what happened, and then the project also fizzled out. But it is the business of the Museums and Monuments Board to look at all these. It's so important. We are losing so much.
Yeah, and I want to let me ask you this, since you have so much experience in this. Tourism, are we harnessing it properly as a country? You go to a lot of places and you can see there is a direct strategy for bringing people into a country. It looks quite random, this part of.
No, I'm afraid to say we don't have a program for tourism. It's all ad hoc. We had a tourism plan and program in the 80s and early 90s. I don't know whether that program is still there, but that defined the policies, the direction, the action plan, and the strategic directions that we should take as a country to evolve, But now it's, sometimes to some point it's even more political. It's a shame. We are destroying a lot of what we have and what we can do with politics. So we look at only one dimension. But otherwise, go to a country like, I've been to Panama, and a taxi driver picks you at the airport. He knows everywhere. They have been trained, taxi drivers have been trained when they pick passengers up, wherever they are going, they will start talking to you about the tourist aspects. And you go to Egypt, they have tourism police. They make sure that people don't loiter around tourism sites like we do in Cape Coast Castle with little kids begging every day. They don't. Because tourism is important for them. Tourism is a business. If you don't see it that way, as a business that is bringing in money to the country, then forget it. If you put somebody at the top who is only thinking about how to satisfy foot soldiers and put them in places and pay them, you are wasting your time. I'm not saying foot soldiers are not important. If somebody is qualified, put him there. But you don't put somebody in certain places because, he suffered for the party. No. it's a business. So put people who are qualified to do the job for the country, and make sure that people have the right policies, right attitudes, and a national outlook to look at tourism, because it's a major business. Now, probably we are swollen-headed because we have gold, we have oil, and all that. But we have all the qualities that can make, and we say that tourism is a third, revenue, foreign revenue, we can increase it. We can increase it because we have natural tourism products.
Okay.
But we haven't done that.
Okay. Now, in wrapping up on the PANAFEST conversation and what it has done, can we really say there were significant gains from the period of conception up to the period when at least you left? Because then at least you were directly in charge, so you can give us some proper information on this. Were there any significant gains?
There were a lot of gains that have not even been publicized.
What would be your top three?
First of all, Central Region is a fourth poorest region in Ghana. Few people know. Apart from the three northern regions, the next poorest region in Ghana is Central Region. I saw tourism as the industry that could drive the whole region and make money for the region. So we deliberately had plans to develop products that would do the trick. We already had the castles and forts, but they are not the only ones that make tourism. When we invited the Director of Health and Director of Education, Director of Water and Sewage to be part of the Tourism Development Committee of the region, they didn't understand. Later they did and realized that if you're going to have tourism, you need to make sure water runs. You need to make sure you have hospitals that are good. You need to make sure there's security. You need to make sure that people have good rooms to stay in. And that's how we developed it. So what happened? PANAFEST started, 92 started, and then when 94 was coming, the demand alone of people wanting to come, and because of the 2-year time frame, we had people now go and rehabilitate your hotels. Government even gave money to a hoteliers association in the region to clean up their hotels, refurbish. We got all the hotels in Cape Coast filled up. People had to go and find accommodation in the Western region. And that is what put pressure on a lot of organizations to start opening up in Cape Coast. Current Elmina Beach Hotel was a guest house owned by KNUST. Soon after that, they invested more money, and that's what we have as Elmina Beach Hotel. It came out of PANAFEST. There was a time, I think that even 94, when it had started, they didn't have all the rooms done. They had only about 50 rooms, but they were all taken. But it encouraged them to do some more. And people started building hotels in Cape Coast. Cape Coast Hotel was not there. You could count the number of beds that were in the Central Region at the time. But PANAFEST brought in a lot more. Those who wanted to stay and go on the Elmina Cape Coast beachfront, a number of those who wanted to resettle have come home. The current executive director of PANAFEST has been here since 94. He's married here, he's settled, he's doing business, and many, many more are coming every year. Now, but that apart, it also opened up the Central Region for a lot of businesses. We got the banks coming in to Cape Coast because there were a lot of activities that were coming with the tourism. And, of course, we had other programs like Trade and Tourism Fair. We had a whole lot of other programs. So the banks were all seeing Cape Coast opening up. But most of them withdrew when the economy... Now go to Cape Coast, most of the banks are even in the universities, and some are not in the city. How do you build a region? So apart from the nation as a whole benefiting from various locations and venues where people visited, Central Region was the prime beneficiary. And that is one way of raising a region. Everybody hears of the good schools in Cape Coast, that's all. But Central region is the fourth poorest region in this country. If we were serious with tourism alone, and not only Central region, Volta region, lots of tourism attractions. If well developed, the regions could all pick up, rather than us seeing the development going up only in the national capital.
Yeah, okay. Now, let's talk a bit about literature. You've authored 9 books, from works of fiction, biographies, and you alternate between, telling the history and a bit of controversy as well. I look at your 1986 book, The Trial of J.J. Rawlings.
Mm-hmm.
And for some, they say you tried to tell the story of the revolution as it happened in 79. But they also say perhaps you were a bit too kind in your narration of what happened.
But that's how history is told. People tell it from their own point of view. You don't have one line of history, but the facts must be the same. The facts in the book are the same. People have opinions, and they are entitled to them.
Okay.
The important thing is that we should record facts. Everything in the book is a fact. You can't dispute any part of the book. You may disagree. And again, as I'm saying, I wrote this in
1986.
Yeah, it was published in 86. I started writing about soon after 79 ended. And it ended up being published by Ghana Publishing. And I remember the first edition, 5,000 copies sold in no time. So, and of course, with hindsight, people have even evaluated the whole June 4th. The same character came in for 31st December, PNDC, NDC. So people have varying opinions about varying periods. But you cannot fault the facts that are presented in the book.
Okay. Tell me about Dialogue with the North. An African journalist looks at Holland. Even the title is interesting.
It is. Those were the days of it's a world debate on North-South dialogue, that the North should dialogue with the South. We're like just the raw materials, and then they were developing with our raw materials and so on. So the Council of Europe designed a program where a few journalists were selected from Africa to go to Europe. And a few journalists from Europe were selected to come to Africa. And I got the chance to be attached to a magazine in Holland.
Okay.
And what was interesting about that exercise, which lasted for about between 8 and 12 weeks, was that there were certain topics that you had to cover that linked the two. Culture because there are Ghanaians living in Holland. There are Dutch people living in Ghana. Trade because our cocoa. We send them raw materials, but I had to visit the harbor to see what do they do with the cocoa when it arrives, and then go to the north of Amsterdam to look at factories that process the cocoa, talk to opinion leaders, talk to policymakers, talk to business manufacturers. There were Ghanaians also living in asylum. They also had to tell their story. Why are they, in place where they are? I traveled around Holland maybe 50 times during that period, because it's easy to travel around Holland in train. So I picked all the experiences. And I was attached to a magazine called Bein. It was located halfway down south of Holland. And so that's where I operated from. But that was only our editorial office. So I was writing articles for that magazine. And I did this over the period that we were doing that exchange program. And then at the end of the day, I was told, I think even when I got back to Ghana, that all your articles have been put together. I didn't know they were educating. They said it won the first prize amongst all the entries from journalists throughout Europe and Africa. So the editor-in-chief, a landman, suggested, why don't you put this in a book? I said, why not? So I re-edited, he did the foreword, and it became a book. So it was like an African looking at Holland. Every time they have looked at us. And I also was very frank with them on some of the brutal things they have done to us, and how some of our people were treated in prisons and so on, because I went to prisons, I went to a whole lot of places to talk to Ghanaians, and all my experiences are there. And I also, part of the interesting thing is our cocoa. We send them the raw materials and look at what they do with them, the process into cosmetics, into chocolates, into other things, then bring them back to us. We pay 3 times, so big lessons.
Okay. Do you follow contemporary Ghanaian writers, the new generation that are coming up? You follow any of them?
Yes.
What do you make of the new scene, both fiction and non-fiction? So Base Wahamon, Glover, Tai Salasi, the new age writers that we have.
Well, they also have their own ways of looking at things. I mean, a girl goes to Wesley Girls High School and talks about how the experience of a girl in a high school, and from the point of view of how parents have no idea what girls do in secondary school and so on. This is Glover's book. And so they have their own prism. I mean, they are looking at the world from a certain angle. If you also meet some of the Ghanaians who have lived abroad, writing also from their perspectives from there, and sometimes some of the facts are not very accurate. But otherwise, that is how creative writing is. You look at the angle from which you see it and then present it. You are presenting your world outlook. If your world is small, you create a small picture. If your world is big, you also have that. So when I'm writing now, like the latest book I'm doing, Jamestown to Jamestown.
Jamestown to Jamestown?
Yep.
So from Ghana, Jamestown to Caribbean, Jamestown?
No, not
or
Caribbean.
Jamestown in
Virginia.
the US, Virginia,
yes,
Jamestown.
Virginia, Jamestown.
Okay, that's an interesting one.
So it covers a whole lot that I've read all the books. I must withdraw that. I have read a lot of the books that have been written, but I think that I'm going to give a slice of black civilization from Jamestown here to Jamestown there, and back to Jamestown.
Okay. Now, you've also spent time as a journalist. You were editor of the Daily Graphic.
True.
Did you change the name of the Daily Graphic?
At the time I was there, yes.
Why?
Because that was the mood of the time. It was the revolution, everything was the people's. So we changed the name from, we added People's Daily Graphic. Why? You see, we have a lot of work to do in the area of journalism. And I was trained a journalist. And we have copied everything from the West. So what is the big story? The big story is, what a friend of mine in Nigeria calls civil service journalism. The president said, so and so said, so and so said, so and so said. What about the people who make the news? You go to a festival, a whole community have organized their festival. And the next morning, the story is not about the festival. It's about what the president said or what the chief said. Isn't that doing a disfavor to the people? So as a result, we do not even have any value for the festivals that our people conduct. And they spend a lot of time to prepare for festivals. I remember during the Achampon period, it was a convention to allow civil servants and government workers whose villages or towns were celebrating festivals to go back home that weekend. You got that that was a way of knowing about yourself, about the country. I don't think you go back to your town festival in suits. You become yourself. You relax. You immerse yourself in the culture. It's a kind of a reunion, family reunion. For 3 days, you meet people that you haven't met for a long time. You chat, you talk to grandfathers, grandmothers. You learn about customs, how to greet, how to pour libation, how to do this. It's all part of growth. But what we have done is we've just imposed the urban side of things into everything we write and do. So the stories are the stories of the big men. So that was the whole idea. Let's go back and give the microphones to the ordinary people as well. So we're doing a lot of development stories. Yes, in the graph. Go back to the time that I was editor. So it's important. My mind about that hasn't changed at all. That we should really...
You don't have done things any different?
No, not at all. I have no apologies to anybody.
All right, then. You are watching Face to Face with the Honorable Kojo Yankah. When we return, we enter the final hurdle. Yes, we'll still talk about journalism and how his dreams of making journalism better led to the establishment of a small school that is right now not so small.
For regular news checks as they unfold, 2020 news all day, all the time. Politics, sports, entertainment, business, and more. 2020 news. We bring you the world in 20 minutes.
Welcome back to Face, and it's the final hurdle of our conversation with the Honorable Kojo Yankah. It's a conversation I must say I've enjoyed a lot. Now, Honorable, you have certain beliefs about how journalism should be practiced. So you left Daily Graphic. You headed the GIJ for a bit.
Not for a bit, for 10 years.
Okay. And decided then that, okay, I want to make a difference in my own way. So you set up your own school.
Yes. It all depends on the kind of vision you have in life. I grew up through several periods in Ghana's history. And by the time I was leaving government in 1999-2000, we had just opened up the airspace for private participation in the media. We had just given out the first 12 licenses, if I should call it, to private radio stations to establish themselves. Otherwise, we only had GTV and GBC, GBC 1, GBC 2, GBC 3. I worked on all three of them. And incidentally, I was also hosting a program called, what's it called, Face to Face?
That would be quite a coincidence.
Yeah. No, Talking Point.
Oh!
Talking Point. I was hosting it. Anyway, but that's just... So, we were only used to one channel. And then, here was I had been director of Ghana Institute of Journalism. We had trained a lot of the journalists in Nigeria and Southern Africa. Some came from those who were liberating themselves. They brought all their students to GIJ and then occasionally to NAFTI. And we had that setup of only state-controlled programs, stations. Then we opened up to radio, first 12. And then newspapers were also opening up. So by the time I was leaving government in 2000, there were only just, I would say, a dozen private radio stations. But the important thing is that the field was open now for more to come. So the idea was all these new private stations, radio, television, newspapers, you needed trained manpower. And then again, that was the time technology was coming in fresh. So in fact, I opened the first computer lab at GIJ before leaving. You know, so, and GID was the only school. So I said, this country and the rest of West Africa, apart from Nigeria, really, at that time, there was no school of journalism on the west coast of Africa. I've worked in Liberia. In other words, I know Liberia, I know Sierra Leone, I know Gambia, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo. And they didn't have any school close to GID. Even Nigeria, apart from the universities, there's a Nigerian Institute of Journalism. So West Africa didn't have much. Even East Africa, Kenya, yes. Uganda, yes. You know, they had schools of journalism and communication. So I said, one contribution that I can make to the landscape is to open up another venue for more education on journalism and communications. And mind you, it's not just journalism that we should be worried about. Communication as a whole, at all levels, public relations, strategic communications, marketing, even publishing is a form of communication. So I said, well, let me try something. Of course, it wasn't funds. If I'm sure that you were my son those days, you say, what crazy things are you doing? Because I'm using all my end of service benefits to start a school. I mean, thank God my wife didn't divorce me. But I mean, it was a crazy thing to do, but I meant to do it. And we started from asylum down, rented premises with 60 students. It went on. We moved from that house to another house because the landlord increased the rent. We couldn't pay. And we moved on to another house until we ended up on the high street, you know, in Ghana House, where the population grew from 60 to 400. UNESCO recognized that instantly because our vision was very different and dynamic. And we're using a lot of technology to propel teaching and so on. So we were there for another 2-3 years. We are growing bigger and bigger. We grew to 700. We needed a bigger place. And that's how we landed in Adabraka Discovery House, where our population is now about 1,400. So,
and you look at where it has come from and where AUCC as it is now. You are content with what has happened? Is this the vision?
It's part of it. We haven't reached there at all. It's because we're broadening it. You know, see, communication drives the world. At the time we started, social media was not strong. Now, social media itself it's a new area where you should even do a set of syllabuses for. So we are working on that, expanding the frontiers. We are looking to creative arts because creative arts also are forms of communication. And so we've just established a School of Creative Arts. So the vision still continues. It's bigger than what it is now, but I know that we will get there.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Honorable Kojo Yankah, for your time and for welcoming us to your lovely home on Face to Face. I hope you enjoyed the chat as much as I did. My name is Godfred Akoto Boafo. Keep watching Face to Face. Have a good day.